Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Friday. This morning, I have for you an amazing, powerful woman, Flick Gray. She is a self-described wandering mad academic, also an open dialogue practitioner. Please welcome to the stage, Miss Flick Gray.
Does my Madonna microphone work? Yeah, great. Thank you. I was asked what kind of microphone I wanted, and then someone said, do you want a Madonna mic? And I was like, yeah. I didn't even know what the other options were. Good morning, everyone. Really lovely to see you all, and a little bit scary, actually. But thank you for getting up early on this last day of themes. I really didn't sleep much last night. So when Jemima said, how long's your talk? I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's long enough. Which reminds me of one of my favourite jokes. I'm not good at remembering jokes, but this one's my favourite. What's the best thing about being an insomniac? No more sleeps till Christmas. And I also have to say that giving a keynote at themes is kind of like Christmas, better than Christmas for me, especially with my biological family. This is like, as someone said yesterday, Christmas with my logical family. I like that. Anyway, you guys are kind of a family of sorts, and we're, like families where, I've also had a really intense emotional roller coaster ride of a conference, but I think that's my job. My gorgeous friend and colleague, S.J. Hayward, describes what we do as professional feelers of feelings. And there's been a lot of laughter, and for me at least, a lot of tears. And I even have a chemical straitjacket on, and I still cried a bunch. I whacked in this graffiti, this random graffiti at the last minute, because it makes me laugh. It will all be okay. You are wonderful. Lexapro rocks. And even though I carry a Sharpie pen in my bag and I have a long history of graffiti, I first came out on an anonymous toilet door as a teenager. And a big shout out to all the teenagers in the process of coming out in this currently hostile environment. Queer lives matter. Queer young people matter. And I promise I didn't do it. I didn't do this graffiti. I know that Lexapro is real because I ate it for breakfast. And I know that my choice to take Lexapro is real because my psychiatrist helped me come off all my psych drugs, and we explored together what that was like. Lewis, my child part, loved your question. Is it real? Can I eat it, or can it eat me? And my child parts are often, but not always, the wisest parts of me. And they loved that question. I know that shame and suicidality are real because sometimes they try to eat me for breakfast. Not today, thankfully. I am not sponsored by a drug company. I just like some help taking the edge off my anxiety. I came off all of my meds with the help of my very lovely, humble psychiatrist, and then I reported my childhood abuser to the police, and I needed more help than my networks could give me. So we could call psych meds mother's other little helpers. And I know psychiatrists like Sandy Steengard, who says this in public, that she also takes the edge off her anxieties, but with alcohol, because she's socially needs some warming up. At the moment, I have access to the executive lounge at the Hilton, but I still need something to take the edge off my anxiety. And so there are many ways to describe what I do. Jemima asked me how to introduce me. So many different ways of describing it, but one of them is that I have small child inner parts, which is a really predictable response to childhood adversity. I listened to my little inner parts. They said, bring the toy up on stage, so I did. And I really encourage other people to listen to their little parts. My motto this morning is to stay playful. Thank you, Max, my delightful, insightful inner 8-year-old. And please do not misgender Max. She is a girl and her pronouns are she and her. And she really likes to climb trees. So sometimes when I'm a bit early for my psychiatrist appointments, we climb trees together. We also go trampolining, which Professor van der Kolk says is very good for trauma survivors. Duh, Max could have told you that. But of course, grown-ups are not great at learning from little people. So thank you all for still being here, very sincerely. I know that many of us really struggle to be here for all sorts of reasons. Thank you, Lewis and Mike. One of my teachers, Janina Fisher, whose work around childhood trauma and parts I really value, as a framework that I find much more useful than the vitriolic label of personality disorder, but who speaks sometimes, even Janina Fisher speaks sometimes in ways that other us as survivors, as if we are somehow different from the teachers. How can we find ways to speak that honour the otherness of the other? This question sears my soul and I am still not very good at it. It has led me both to my PhD work, which I'll talk about in a minute, and I describe my PhD as looking at a problem, and I spent a lot of time critiquing problems. But I don't just want to be part of the problems, I want to be part of offering really viable, life-affirming solutions into my ecosystem. Not solutions, but ways that we might try together and see how it fits. So the things I've come to are intentional peer support, open dialogue, MAD studies, and alternatives to suicide. These are all ways to be in dialogue with others. Despite Janina Fisher's flawed work, I do love one piece of advice that she has. Never trust a grown-up who has no inner child parts. Lewis and Mike, I've met your inner child parts and my little parts like playing with you. Thank you also, Mike, for graciously... Is Mike Slade here? Thank you for graciously receiving my feedback that you said nothing in your talk that we consumer survivors haven't been saying for 20 years. And just because you're a poo-bum professor, people listen to you who won't listen to me. No, that is sometimes incredibly useful. I often quote you in your book about recovery that we need a truth and reconciliation process in mental health to name and speak about the bad things. My little parts have also told me that we need to speak about the bad things. That is the main thing they teach me. But when Mike Slade says so, more doors open. So Mike and all of you allies, keep opening those doors and let us walk in. Let us walk in with you, alongside you, and sometimes ahead of you. Let us have our space too. You can include us, and sometimes we will include you. You can help us, and sometimes we will help you, or not, and we'll kind of figure stuff out together, and maybe help's not even the right word. I don't know. I was standing in a coffee queue just after Mike's keynote on Wednesday, and most of the TheMHS Conference, I think, happens in the coffee queues. Shout out to all of you still out there. That coffee machine always breaks when I come close, but I know I'm not the only one. I was speaking with some powerful allies in the coffee queue, John Farhall and Marianne Wider, I think that was who it was. And I was mouthing off, Mike Slade didn't say anything that we haven't said. And they both giggled and said, do you want to speak a bit louder? Mike's right in front of you. Hashtag diplomatic. There's a joke in my family that my father thinks I should be a diplomat. That's the joke. So thank you, John and Mariana, for playing with me. I am so often positioned as the one who brings a critical voice, or my critical inner voice, as Marianne calls me, which is so lovely, but more than once this week I've been told that I have become a voice in someone's head. I hope I am doing you justice. I hope I am doing justice, and I'm trying, but this is hard. I come as a truth teller, and I hope you join me in saying, when we need to, that the emperor has no clothes. Because being a truth teller is so, so lonely sometimes. Eva Cox, the wonderful feminist, did a powerful talk about being difficult. And this is a word I have struggled with my entire life. Literally from the day I was born, I was apparently a difficult child. This is a word that is in my bones, and it is so lonely but important to be difficult. But it often involves losing a sense of belonging to the tribe. I want to start, speaking of tribe, I've started, I know, but this talk just kept getting longer the more I wrote. I do really want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, but I want to find ways that we can do this without being tokenistic. Later in my talk, I'll be discussing the concept of benevolent othering from my PhD research. And I take 100,000 words to make my point. Lunig, in his brilliant way, managed to say pretty much the same thing in just one cartoon. Let's not walk triumphantly together in tokenistic ways, patting ourselves on the back for how great we are. How can we find ways to walk through the shit together? I argue that there's a real potential to acknowledge the traditional custodians in a way that's more about proclaiming myself as a good person who does the right thing and says the acknowledgement and then moves on, as if we are not all standing on stolen land, as if we have learnt all there is to learn from this land and from those who have a deep and enduring connection with this land. We are all connected, and there is work in decolonising solidarity. How do those of us who are not Indigenous to this land find ways to be in relationship with this land and with the traditional custodians? I wish I had a tradition of song that I could draw on, like Lewis did yesterday. He and I were both at a conference in Perth in May, and there were so many Indigenous peoples from many continents, and the ways in which song and music and politics and laughter infused the space remain in my body. And so I wondered what part of my communal being could offer something to this space in acknowledgement. I spoke on Tuesday at the Consumer Forum about my own history and trying to find belonging, and I first found a sense of home in the lesbian community. I used to live in a huge rambling share house with 8 women and a little girl. She was the first one to call me Flick, very wise little girl. We had 2 dogs, 2 cats, 3 chickens, and a lot of laughter. One of the women who lived there was called Danica Lani. And this song I want to play for you, if the technology works, it did before, is her acknowledgement to country. I invite you to sing along if you are so inclined, because I think music is really powerful, and Lewis inspired me. Cue. These are the words you are welcome to sing along. I don't care if you can't sing. Singing is a human thing. Hang on, that's not the right song. No. It's the one called Acknowledgement. It's great music though. That one's called You Deserve to Be with Someone Who Loves and Respects You. That's a good song too, but no, that's not it. Oh my God, this is going to be so bad. It's called Acknowledgement by Danica Lani. Do you need to say anything that I need to say back? Something? No. Technology doesn't talk the same language as me, and sometimes you've got to learn how to speak its language. This is so embarrassing. It's like all the songs on my... We're just going to have to not do it?
That is the song, Acknowledgement.
What was it? Can you try it again? I'll listen harder.
Of this land,
there it is.
I acknowledge the earth. I acknowledge the earth. I honor the ancestral spirits of this land. I acknowledge the indigenous people. Come onto country the right way. I honor the ancestral spirits of this land. I acknowledge the indigenous people. I acknowledge the country the right way. I honor the ancestral spirits of this country I was born. I acknowledge the indigenous people. I acknowledge the country the right way. I honor the ancestral spirits of this land. I acknowledge the indigenous the earth, indigenous people. I acknowledge the earth, wind. I honor the ancestral spirits of this land. I acknowledge the earth. I acknowledge the earth. I honor the ancestral spirits of this land.
I'm also, it's a great song, isn't it? Amazing. Google her, she has a website. I also just needed some space to breathe, and that actually does literally help me breathe. I also remember that some Maori participants in some open dialogue training I ran in Perth recently, they spoke of the rivers and the mountains that they come from. And I just want to say this is my river. It's the Yarra. When I was in primary school, I lived on one side of this river and I went to school on the other, so I was constantly crossing this river. I now own a very small but beautiful block of land not far from its source. And when I was in London, where I lived for much of last year, I missed this river. I didn't even know I would miss a river. I remember seeing a picture at Heathrow of the Thames and the Yarra side by side, and I was like, that's my river, which is good to know. I don't want to live in London, I don't. And when I moved back home, I chose to live really close to this river. I run and I kayak and I mountain bike ride as often as I can along this river. There have been nights when I have not slept because of flashbacks, and I've gone to the river at dawn and kayaked until I was no longer in trauma. And when I was broken, thoroughly broken earlier this year, I asked the river, where do I belong? And the river literally told me, take care of this earth and you will belong. I've watched these little ducklings grow up, and I've watched these silly geese be silly geese, and like Lunig, I think silly geese are our teachers, and I've marvelled at the flights of the fruit bats. This river is brown, but I love this river. Lewis also spoke yesterday of some unofficial mental health services. The Yarra and the bushland surrounding the Yarra is certainly one of the most healing spaces I know, and choosing to live within walking distance of this river was one of the most life-affirming choices I have ever made. After my talk on Tuesday, despite a sort of standing ovation, a few people stood up and it was great, I had a massive shame spiral. And I was so blessed to receive incredible peer support from my community. You know who you are, thank you. In case anyone is wondering, I've updated my credentials as someone who struggles with my emotional landscape. I was really glad to have trained so many folks in intentional peer support, which I really only do so there are folks who can support me when I need it. I am not joking. On Tuesday night, I also called a dear friend and fellow traveller in Melbourne because by the end of the day, I was hysterical. And she helped me understand that I was having a trauma response, that everything made sense, and that perhaps I needed to take my little inner parts to go and have some fun. So we jumped on the bed a lot. And we skipped a lot of the conference on Wednesday. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. And we went to the aquarium and we watched seahorses and jellyfish, and they brought me back down. I was going to say to earth, but even bigger than the earth. I don't think of myself as a person with a mental illness or a personality disorder, even though I've managed to collect 3 more diagnoses this year, including another personality disorder. I'm almost into double figures. Apparently, Miranda Epstein tells me if you get more than 20 diagnoses, you get a letter from the Queen. I understand myself as human. In fact, human might not even be the word I use. Maybe I'll say animal or stardust, I don't know. But if you put little humans in painful environments as children, we survive the best way we can. For me, that meant I would rock myself backwards and forwards, and I'm doing that right now. When my inner 3-year-old feels like things aren't safe, it's okay, honey. Sometimes I've caused pain to my body because it helped me get through. It helped me not get angry at my caregivers, but to direct my anger towards myself and to survive. Sometimes I would hide in cupboards, and I can still tell you where the hiding spots are in most rooms I get into. But one of the main ways I survived was thinking about dying. Thinking about suicide has helped me escape inescapable and overwhelmingly painful situations, both as a child and continuing into the present. Like so many of us, I live with suicidal feelings. Childhood adversity laid down a pattern for my brain of trying to disappear or thinking about suicide when I feel trapped in a painful situation. But I'm learning to listen to those suicidal thoughts and hear what they are telling me. And usually it means that a situation doesn't feel safe, and I think, what's unsafe about this situation? What can we learn from this? I'll talk more later in this talk about some of the beautiful places this has led me. But I also want to acknowledge, if you haven't seen NDIS the musical, you have to see it. It is better than a warm bath, although I also have a really good bath in my executive important person suite in the Hilton. It is so lovely, and I have a magic button. I kid you not, I can press a button and someone will come and shine my shoes. You could not make this shit up. The organisers of themes, you have pioneered allyship in the conference space. Thank you, thank you. Sometimes consumer keynotes are put up in cheap, crappy hotels while the real grown-ups get fancy rooms. Thank you for not doing that. It has been beautiful to be with the grown-ups and weird. I also want to acknowledge my elders, some of the elders of the consumer survivor ex-patient movement. Marinda Epstein and Mary O'Hagan, this is an old photo from 2012. Thank you. Thank you for everything, you guys. But also this one, Sherry Mead and Chris Hansen, this is a more recent photo. Sherry Mead, for those of you who know, has Parkinson's, and she was very physically active, but kayaking is about the only kind of physical release she has, and she taught me to kayak, so I am so grateful for her. I stand on the shoulders of these incredible women. I would not be here up on this stage, and I don't know if I'd be here in this world if it wasn't for these incredible women. They have always had my back. Marinda introduced me to this whole world of consumers and thems and all sorts of stuff. Mary O'Hagan likewise has given me so much time and thoughtful advice and laughter over the years. She's so witty. They're all witty. Sherry Mead created intentional peer support, and Chris Hansen has been my most rigorous teacher. She has been able to give me robust feedback like no other, while still maintaining connection. She's brilliant. My little parts also have to include Ray Waddingham. It's not a great photo. Even though she's not much older than me, she is a wise woman. And like me, she is working at the intersection between open dialogue and peer work. And there is some discomfort in this place, and she helps me find a way to speak of discomfort in a way that is still human. I also acknowledge Louisa Dent-Pierce, who helped me understand my little parts. Thank you for being an elder to my little parts, and I'm so honoured that I helped you become an elder. I've learnt this week that as a keynote, I should present myself as credible. I think I might have already undone that, but I'm supposed to cite my publications records, so here goes. Oh, and also I have to demonstrate that I am just the right amount of crazy. I hope I'm doing that. I describe myself as a wandering mad academic without a vocational home or a nice pay packet. On Tuesday, I spoke about my struggles with a sense of belonging or not quite belonging. And I know this is a shared experience. In fact, I think it's almost a universal human experience to grapple with, where do I belong? In this talk, I'm going to explore some of the spaces that I hope to grow in Australia, some spaces that feel homely to me. This talk is in part a call for allies for these spaces, for non-colonising allies. Because sometimes professionals think they're being allies, but they're actually colonising our territory. But working as an ally, I know for trying to work as an ally to Indigenous decolonisation, it's hard work, but we need to find ways to walk through the shit together. I often struggle to find words for what I do as a job. Professional oversharer is one of my favourites. In fact, I'll come to that. I've got a few slides. This is some of my credibility. I did a talk on 3CR radio, awesome community radio with Piers Gooding, who's now Dr. Piers Gooding. He beat me in the race to get a PhD. I'm a very slow, what's the turtle? I'm the turtle, I'll still get there. We interviewed Marinda Epstein and Dr. David Webb, whose work around suicide is internationally groundbreaking. One of the first, I think he is the first person to do a PhD on suicide as an out suicide survivor. These beautiful this was really fun, by the way. I put these together last night and I was like, I remember these guys. Marinda Epstein brought me into our consumer place, and Kath Roper and John Chrishell created this space, and I'm sure there were lots of other people, and I'm sorry I'm not going to name everyone, but you created this beautiful space where I could come and meet. For this second one, Deep Insight, I got to go and interview all these famous people. I got to ring them up and say, hi, can I interview you? You're amazing. This non-violently overthrow the mental health system and have a nice day is from a poster in Mind Freedom in America. Leaders in the international mental health consumer survivor movement share their thinking. We have amazing thinking and it is an untapped resource, but please don't treat it as a resource that you can exploit and then make money out of. Let us share our thinking in a way that is ethical. This is me, I love this picture. How can we talk about this? I was less than a month out of being kicked out of a psych hospital in Sydney. I was really struggling, but how can we talk about this stuff? I don't know how to talk about borderline personality disorder in a way that doesn't hurt other people, but I find that it hurts me already, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about violence when we get along. That's funny. I love this face. Who wouldn't take that seriously? I was interviewed by Kermit Cole, who I adore, on Mad in America, talking about open dialogue. And I watch it and I'm like, wow, she's really smart. Who's that? Oh, that's previous me. It's really kind of funny. I was on ABC Radio National. I think the exclamation marks delegitimised my credibility somewhat, but it was super cool sitting at home going, that's me on the radio. It's a bit like now, actually. I was published in Asylum magazine earlier this year. This is possibly one of my career highlights. Asylum magazine, for those of you who don't know, is the magazine for democratic psychiatry. It is so beautiful. I even have some real journal articles. I'm like playing with the big kids. I'm going to talk about this benevolent othering, positively speaking about mental health service users, and I'm critiquing benevolent othering. As I say, I both critique and then try and offer some useful alternatives. I'm going to read a little bit of what I wrote because I was smarter then than I was last night when I was trying to finish this. I want to acknowledge what a pleasure it is to be in dialogue with others who are engaged both politically and intellectually in this domain. I understand robust dialogue to be part of what is needed to humanise our collective responses to emotional distress beyond benevolent othering, which I'll explain. Dialogic spaces in which dialogue is generated and encouraged and otherness is respected without conditions offer an alternative beyond benevolent othering. Some examples include the Hearing Voices movement, open dialogue, ... You've got to pay, it's behind a paywall, but if you email me, I can definitely not break the law. I also co-authored a publication with Mary O'Hagan. That had me jumping up and down on my bed. Mary O'Hagan and me in the same sentence. Oh my God. We even said some cool stuff, I think. My credibility, this is my favourite marker of my credibility though. I had some apprentice IPS trainers for about a year. SJ Hayward, Nathan Grixty and Cherie Stiefler, whose last name I still can't say, but that's okay. I hope. Sorry, Cherie. We do this exercise in intentional peer support where we think about what we're moving away from and that energy of like, oh, I'm such a bad person, I haven't achieved my goals, I still haven't finished my PhD, it's only 10 years, you know, that heavy energy of, God, I need to become a better person. Or the energy of what really makes you come alive, and being Dr. Flick makes me come alive. I am Dr. Flick, regardless of whether some university puts a rubber stamp on my being. I have a PhD in madness and shame, and a shout out to Indigo Daya and SJ Hayward for coming up with this language. I love it. I have a PhD in madness and shame from the University of Life. And fuck, I'm over learning. Excuse my language. Learning is hard and hard and hard, and shame is a really hard teacher. I am also a professional oversharer. Thank you to these guys for giving me some credibility, and there goes my credibility. I don't know. If you want to ask me how my PhD is going, beware, there's a traffic light system. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I'm somewhere between black and red. I still think there's hope, my supervisors still think there's hope, but I think we're both a little bit delusional. Where am I in my talk? Oh yes, my elders open up space for me and I continue to do their work. What I try to do in being a professional oversharer is I share in the knowledge that in doing so, I open up more space for all of us to share our truth. And I've had enough feedback over the years to know that this changes lives and opens up whole new horizons of possibility. My elders opened up space for me, and so I continue their work. I've also had enough feedback over the years to know that I'm still learning how to speak in a way that doesn't elicit an immune response from systems that experience my words as coming from a hostile, foreign body. Learning how to speak in a way that others want to listen more and to listen in a way that others want to speak more is how one of my teachers, Jorma Ahonen, characterises open dialogue. And I know from my own personal grappling struggles that part of what the peer, consumer, survivor, alternative, MADS movements, whatever you call us, part of what we do for each other is offer more words into our ecosystem. We offer words that feel more homely than the words imposed upon us by the tendency of biomedical psychiatry towards dominance and monoculture. I argue that we need richer, more human, more expansive, generative words to speak of our experiences. For me, this is often found in poetry and in people's stories and in brilliant academic thinking, and often from my own inner voices. And I know that shit makes spaces more fertile. If you're a gardener, you know that. I also want to name that while I'm in one of the most grounded places I've ever been, I didn't mean to go to the next slide, and maybe someone helped me, I don't know. I'm in one of the most grounded places I've ever been, maybe not right this minute, but usually. I'm experiencing incredible post-traumatic growth. I won't even begin to acknowledge the beautiful spirits around the world and inside of me who have been part of this grounding, but my heart is still very, very, very heavy. I've cried more tears this year than many other years put together. In fact, I nearly didn't make it to be here up on this podium. I have a deep and profound relationship with suicide. And earlier this year, our relationship became really, really close. I'm not going to speak of it in any detail, but just to say that much. We spent a lot of intimate time, just the two of us, often in the darkness. I don't have enough words yet for this experience. It wasn't a suicide attempt. I believe I would have completed if I got to that point. I did my research really well, and I'm both a nerd and a DIY geek, which is either a really good combination or a really bad combination, depending on how you look at it. When you're trying to figure out how to stop life moving through your body because your pain threshold has been crossed too many times. But it also wasn't suicidal ideation, that cruel clinical term that eviscerates the experience from the experience. I was engaging in behaviours that were going to kill me if someone didn't stop me. And I ended up in the emergency department again with police and ambulance and that white, empty, sterile cubicle in the emergency department that I know all too well. And I can tell you there are many things in that space that I could have hurt myself with, but the sense of, is this the best we can do, was what hurt me the most. So I ran away. That flicker of life sent me running twice. The views from the upper floors of that hospital in Melbourne are sensational at night, almost as good as the views from the Hilton here. But the swivel chairs on all the different levels are all equally fun. And the fountain across the road is great for a nighttime paddle. And those adventures kept me feeling alive and non-compliant. But even with the views and the swivel chairs and the fountain, this isn't the place I would want to send anyone I love who is in overwhelming levels of distress. They were really, really kind to me, and they kindly gave me 3 new diagnoses. But I don't think I needed diagnoses, I think I needed human connection. They pointed to my personality as the problem, losing sight of the interpersonal, interconnected learning that we could explore together. It might be more painful to talk about the hard stuff, but I know it opens up more fertile spaces. They also gave me olanzapine, which gave me a lovely warm glow and a good night's sleep, but really didn't solve my problems. The next day, I was discharged into the care of my private psychiatrist, and I went to work as if nothing had happened. Everything's fine, folks. Nothing to see here. As a workaholic survivor of childhood abuse, I'm really good at going to work as if nothing happened in the night. Something happened in the night. When I was asked to give this keynote, I thought, what do I most want to speak with you guys about? I could speak about academic things like this benevolent othering thing, which I will get to, or gems from the International Consumer Survivor Peer Movement, especially the Western Massachusetts Recovery Learning Centre. I am the unofficial cheer squad leader. I could speak about wisdom from open dialogue. As an open dialogue Haji, I have made my trip to Tornio and soaked in the holiness and humanness, very humanness there. Or I could speak of peer-run respite centres around the world that offer the kind of hospitality and being with, non-othering companionship that I believe people in distress, including myself, deeply need in the depths of our despair. Or I could speak about the hospitable clinicians I've met around the world. I have met more deeply humane, hospitable psychiatrists in the last 3 years than the rest of my life put together. There are beautiful people out there, people I would seek to be around when I'm distressed. The disjunct between what I know is possible and what is actually available to my community is heartbreaking, and my heart is sore. I know that we consumers are often tempted to speak or assumed to speak about our lived experience in the past tense. Things were bad then, but now I offer you hope and a role model for recovery. Dance like me on stages. My distress is very present tense. It is very present and sometimes very tense. I want to explore a bit more deeply this cartoon, both this thing of the punch and the nicely. I hope the takeaway isn't that I'm brave. I hope you can hear some words beyond brave. It's really patronising to be called brave. You could call me intelligent, but even then, just take the ideas and do what you will with them. I'm not your inspiration porn. I'm also not sure what Marinda was saying about my dress sense. Where's the next slide? So, violence. I'm going to talk a little bit about violence, and I'm getting very close to the end. Oh my God, I didn't put in the bit from... Anyway, I'm going to have to wing this. So, Zizek is one of my favourite theorists. I use him in my PhD. Those of you who think that sociology is not relevant to mental health have not done your homework. Zizek is a Slovenian sociologist, and he talks about violence. Normally when we talk about violence, what we're thinking about is subjective violence, violence between people, when we punch each other, when we're mean to each other, or when a patient spits at a nurse. It is violence performed by a clearly identifiable agent, and we can point the finger, we know who done it. But he also says there are two types of what he calls objective violence. Don't worry about the words, it's just the ideas I'm hoping to share. One of them is symbolic violence, the imposition of a certain universe of meaning, and it is embodied in language and its forms. I find diagnoses to be symbolic violence. They silence me and they silence my meaning making. There is also structural violence, which Zizek talks about as the often catastrophic consequences of the smooth functioning of our economic and political and mental health systems. Business as usual is violent. So when a consumer gets angry in a unit, they are often responding with subjective violence to pre-existing objective violence. How do we talk in a way that honours that violence can happen at all these levels and justice demands us to redress them all? Now we get to my PhD with about 5 minutes to go, which feels like the story of my life. Othering, some of you may be familiar with. There is a difference. This is from Said's Orientalism. He talks about othering in the context of the Middle East. There is a difference between knowledge of other peoples that is a result of understanding, compassion, careful study and analysis for their own sakes, of really understanding others. And on the other hand, knowledge, if that's what it is, that's part of an overall campaign of self-affirmation, belligerency and outright war. We are good and they are bad. That's where most people take othering. I go to a different place and talk about benevolent othering, which is a way of speaking about others that maintains the othering, but that appears to be positive. I like consumers. I even let them come and sit on my committees. I don't listen to them, but you know. It functions as part of an overall campaign of self-affirmation. We include consumers. We are recovery-oriented. We do open dialogue. We don't really understand this stuff, but you know, go us. And there is still symbolic and systemic violence. I parse it, I also have a degree in linguistic, as we do stuff to them. We good people include, help, acknowledge, value them, those others. So for example, in fact, let's go back. Just some examples. I don't mind gay people, so long as they don't flaunt their lifestyle around my children. That is benevolent othering. Gay people are needed in our community. We teach you things that the heteronormative world needs to hear. Or, I welcome Muslims, so long as they don't practice their faith in a way that makes me feel the slightest bit uncomfortable. Thank you, Pauline Hanson. Or I want to acknowledge Indigenous people, but let's not talk about justice or sovereignty or racial profiling or Indigenous deaths in custody or Indigenous overrepresentation in the mental health system. We want to include consumers, but they need to know their place. Agree with us, not have their own agenda. They need to behave themselves, not be too crazy or not be too sane, just be the right amount of crazy. This is benevolent othering, and my life for the last couple of years has been finding alternative ways of being with each other. This has led me the wrong slide direction. This has led me to open dialogue, which I'm not going to talk a lot about because you can look on a website I created, you can listen on the radio, and you can watch a documentary. Do your homework, folks. And it's fun homework. But open dialogue is a way of being with people in their networks that tries to generate conversation and tries to do it in a way that is honouring the complexity of this stuff is hard. How do we talk about this together? I feel like this is what I'm always doing. How do we talk about this together? And I am just as much a coloniser and violent and all this stuff as anyone else, but I'm trying. And I'm asking you to come and walk through the shit together with me. Who wouldn't want to do that? Alternatives to suicide. How much time have I got? My phone's at the back.
You have 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. Oh my God, I have so much more time than I thought. It's probably because I'm nervous and talking fast. Great, I get to spend some time on alternatives to suicide. I was in the US recently, thank you to Sane Australia, who trusted me enough to not be so offensive that they would regret giving me money to go around the world. I'm so grateful. Sane has been incredibly supportive of my work. I got to explore the world and look at the intersection of open dialogue and peer work, and whenever I could, I went and snuck and looked at other stuff while I was there. Alternatives to suicide is one of the absolute gems I discovered, like Captain Cook. I discovered this. Some folks actually made this stuff. I didn't discover it. Alternatives to suicide is a way of being with people who experience suicidal feelings where it's only us who are talking with us. You can't come and be a benevolent professional and help us get over our suicidal feelings and tell us to stop talking about the suicidal feelings. That is what the mental health system has taught me to do my whole life. Stop talking about the bad stuff and behave yourself, little girl. No. Alternatives to suicide is not it's not trying to encourage, it's not saying suicide's a great thing, but it's saying let's listen to each other. Let's listen to suicidality and what it's teaching us. There are reasons why we feel these things, and if we don't listen to them, they'll just come up somewhere else, some other way. We are often the canary in the mine, and if you don't listen to the canary in the mine, you'll die of toxic gas. Appreciate us. So what they do, it comes from the Western Massachusetts Recovery Learning Centres. You meet in community spaces. You don't meet in mental health spaces because as soon as you put it in a mental health space, people get scared that they're going to be sectioned. So we have to be in spaces where we can talk about these things and trust that no one is going to lock us up, because hospitals don't make people safer. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they kill that last spark. Some people can't run away from psych hospitals like I did, and so they run away in other ways. Alternatives to suicide groups are co-facilitated only by people who identify with their own struggles. We are not policing the boundaries. I am not saying your distress is any more or less than mine, but you have to say, yes, this is me too. We talk about suicide, but more importantly, we talk about the pain, the desperation, the loss and loneliness we feel. We talk about the hard stuff. We offer one another a culture of self-help, mutual respect, support and empathy. We cry, we laugh, we heal. I did the training a couple of months ago. You cannot run these by yourself, which I think is ethically very, very important. But my co-facilitator is currently in the US learning this. So this is all in theory for me right now, but I've been doing this work for years, is being with people in suicidal struggles, saying, yeah, these feelings, they're really hard. The other thing I wanted to spruik, I was going to talk about intentional peer support, but there's a website for that and there's training for that and there's lots of us. I'm not the IPS person. But MAD studies, I really, 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 really ask that MAD studies not be colonised. Recovery in some ways has been colonised by professionals who mean so well, but who then take up our space, speak for us, or make us speak in their words. We need spaces where we can make sense together, where it's not an us and a them, but there is a privileging of certain kinds of knowledge. these are just some of the brilliant resources that are part of the emerging discipline of mad studies. I am literally a reference in 2 of these in the tiniest little text, but my God, I was excited when I saw them. There are amazing people around the world. Mad Matters Canada is pioneering the work of allyship in mad studies. There are people there who have created mad studies and then let the crazy folk do their thing. You've got to learn how to support us to do our thing. This is survivor research. Friends make the best medicine. The Icarus Project is an incredible resource. They teach me constantly, you are not alone. Madness Made Me, Mary O'Hagan. Mad at School, Margaret Price has helped me understand why I'm struggling to get through school. They call university school. Searching for a Rose Garden, brilliant. If you're more of a radio person, Madness Radio. If you're more of an internet person, Mad in America. This last one, oh, there's David Webb, and there's also this last one down in the bottom corner, which I snuck in really early this morning, called the Institute for the Development of Human Arts. Mad Studies is not about excluding anyone's knowledge. IDA in New York it's a collaboration with professionals who have done their homework and who know how to be allies. Professionals including psychiatrists, clinicians, all sorts of people, but we need space for the difficult conversations. Please don't colonise mad studies, let us take the lead. In the beautiful words of this quote, which is often misattributed to Lilla Watson, she's adamant that it was a communal language. She says, if you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I find that so powerful. And finally, I'm going to finish with a poem that I've seen both at the Transformation Centre in the US, which is a training institute for peer workers, and also in open dialogue spaces. This speaks, I think for me, poetry speaks to all of us. I am going to say before I finish with the words of Mary Oliver, because she says stuff way better than I do, way more poetic. There is no them, there is just us, but we also need justice. In that sense, I want to say, please don't take our jobs. Just because you have a little bit of lived experience does not mean you have done your homework of the collective knowledge base that has gone before, that has made these spaces possible. I will finish with Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. Please stop trying to be good. And I'll stop adding words. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you about mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Do you need a microphone?
No, it's pretty loud. I'll go stand over here.
Because you can't have my Madonna microphone.
I know. I've got to work a lot harder to earn that. That's not something you just get given. Every time this woman speaks, I'm flabbergasted. I go into this sort of deep, reflective kind of thing. It's really good, but it's also really hard to then say, just thanks. Thanks for being you.
Thank you.